Hello and welcome again to What If Natives Won, a video blog and channel about alternate history and American Indians, Native Americans, indigenous peoples. This is the fifth video of about 24 planned ones. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. I'm also together with Rob Schmidt of Blue Corn Comics, editing and putting out a short story anthology, What If Natives Won? This is what this video and blog and channel are about. There's a huge lack of alternate history written about American Indians, indigenous people. Many people don't like to think about genocides in America. They likely were never taught about them. Many of them don't want to be reminded, or they want to be believed these genocides never happened, that it was all an accident. I've had great success using alternate history to teach my students, show them that absolutely nothing in history was inevitable. It never had to be. The worst of human history is always a conscious choice. How things turn out is based on how evil the evil choose to be, and how well and how strongly good people choose to stand up to them or stop them. The way things turned out in history took a very specific set of circumstances. Sometimes history can turn on very small things. Change even one and you have an entirely different history, different present, different society. Today we talk about what if Europe had been conquered by a Muslim caliphate or the Mongols. How will this affect the Americas? If almost literally anyone else colonizes and invades instead of those Europeans who did, Native people in the world are far better off. It may be hard to hear this, but we live right now in a dystopian world. One of the worst of all possible outcomes for anyone who is not white. America is today 98% non-native. At least 75 million to 112 million natives were killed by not one genocide, but a series of them. These genocides, the last of them ended only in the year 2000, and they happened in America, Brazil, Canada, Guatemala, Argentina, Mexico, and elsewhere. On top of that is massive genocide denial. This is not taught in almost all American schools. There are racist images everywhere that are often not admitted to be racist. But all of this could change if others come to the Americas, or Europeans don't invade until much later. What if Europe had been conquered by a Muslim caliphate? How would this affect natives and the Americas? I'm far from the first one to argue. If Europe is not where the world powers come from, the Americas are far better off. In Kim Stanley Robinson's Year of Rice and Salt, the Black Plague kills much higher numbers of Europeans, over 90% of them. Europe becomes mostly North African and Middle Eastern. Europeans become most slaves worldwide, with the Viking slave trade selling European Christians to the Mideast. The Americas remain largely free, except for Brazil. The Americas are united as the Haudenosaunee, better known to most as the Iroquois. Another way Europe could be entirely conquered is if the Abbasid Caliphate seizes Constantinople in 717. The Caliphate, as you can see here, stretched across North Africa, Spain, the Mideast, and much of Central Asia and North Asia. But by 771, Spain had broken away as the Caliphate of Cordoba. Later, much of the rest of their empire also broke away. This was the Islamic Golden Age. The empire was considered the height of science, medicine, education, technology, art, literature, and philosophy. One of the other empires they were trying to conquer was the Byzantine, the eastern successor to the Roman Empire. By this time, the Byzantines had been fighting a series of wars with Muslim caliphates, losing Egypt, Syria, and most of what became Turkey. 40 years before, their capital had itself been under siege. The city lost most of its population. The second siege in 717 came even closer to success. Emperor Leo III proved to be both a military and diplomatic genius, getting enough troops from a truce with enemies in Europe and using Greek fire to defeat the caliphate. Constantinople would not fall to a caliphate until over 700 years later, in 1452. One emperor after another was able to use conflict among Muslim states or get allies and mercenaries from the West. What if Leo III was unable to get a truce with the Khan of Bulgaria? With fewer troops, Constantinople and the rest of the empire falls. Europe is invaded by the caliphate through the Balkans and also through Italy and Spain. Such victory makes the caliphate less likely to split apart. There is every chance that all of Europe falls, perhaps all the way to Scandinavia and the British Isles. The eastern half of Europe was not yet fully Christian. Russia, Poland, Slavic areas, Scandinavia, Even much of Germany and England were not yet Christian. Pagan faiths would get suppressed, many of its peoples also converting due to better rule under Islam. Christians in Western and Southeast Europe will become a minority, much as they were in Spain. How will this affect the Americas? Much of the early drive for colonialism was to get around the Muslim Mideast and North African monopoly on trade with Asia. Muslim states will spend several centuries conquering and converting Europe. Europe is certainly far too big to stay one caliphate. There also would still be expansion to India and Central Asia and to sub-Saharan Africa. It's certain that there will be at least half a dozen rival caliphates, perhaps a dozen. And at that point will come the Turkic invasion, lasting centuries, coming from Central Asia. This will be followed by Mongol invasions coming from North Central Asia. Muslim Europe will spend centuries fighting them off. Some of the successors to Mongol Khanates lasted until the 1800s. It's possible Muslim states don't try to colonize the Americas for up to 300 years later than European invaders did in our timeline. That means 300 years for native technology to advance. At this point, I often hear some surprise from students and others. They have been taught, and they believe, that native people were supposedly primitive, lived on in the woods, were hunter-gatherers, Stone Age, didn't even have the wheel or iron. False and falser. Every single one of those claims are false, and originally came from colonialist or scientific racist. Native agriculture was superior to European. That's why European colonizers starved it first. That's why most of the food the world eats today is native developed, native cultivated, native hybridized. Much of native technology was superior to Europeans. Better calendars, astronomy, and the architecture was about equal. Natives also had far better medicine, brain surgery, eye surgery, plastic surgery, heart surgery, hypodermic needles, obsidian scalpels that are even today better than surgical steel, combat medicine specialist, herbal healing, quinine, curare, diabetes medicine. Philosophically and socially, native societies were far more advanced, with gender equality, mostly no bias against LGBT people, radically democratic, and warfare limited to raiding or conquest for tribute. No genocides, as were routine among Europeans. As for the claim of no wheel, that's simply false. The claim originally came from scientific racists. Wheeled toys were common. So are medicine wheels. So are wheels used to spin cloth. Draft animals, or flat regions that would make them useful, were not as common. Instead, they used rollers to move heavy stones. As for the claim of no iron, well, this is an Alaskan native iron hatchet made from a meteorite. Much more common were Inuit iron spear tips or harpoon tips. Some natives, like the Mohawks, are famous for adapting iron very quickly. But most natives didn't have iron. Iron forging began in the Mideast and West Africa. It didn't reach Europe until 1100 BCE at the earliest, and didn't reach Ireland or Scandinavia until 500 BCE. Native metallurgy used every metal except iron in very sophisticated ways. Gold, silver, jewelry and sculpture of all kinds, copper tools, bronze statues, all of them going back at least 3,000 years, including for a time copper weapons, until they were abandoned for obsidian weapons. The main point is that with 300 more years until European invasion, the invaders will likely face native iron weapons, potentially even guns. The other main points are that these European or North African and Mideast caliphates also may be less likely to spread epidemics. As I've discussed in the last 3 videos, Muslim armies didn't use starvation as a weapon of war like Europeans did. They didn't deliberately spread disease as the English army did, or American fur traders. They conquered but did not practice multiple genocides. And because of Muslim ritual cleansing, there would also be less disease spread. We could expect typical epidemics and death tolls, 20 to 35%, but not 90% or more as Europeans spread and caused. It's also true, as I mentioned in several previous videos, that a Muslim conquest may possibly be more tolerant than a Christian European one. It depends on the caliphate. Córdoba in Spain was tolerant, in part because they had large Christian and Jewish minorities. English, French, or German caliphates with many Christians are more likely to be tolerant. How long these colonies stay conquered is hard to say, but when they become independent, they will be majority native, unlike America today, which is 98% non-native. All of that is why this counts as native victory. The other way all of Europe could have been conquered is by the Mongol Empire. At its height, the Mongols conquered almost all of what became Russia, China, Iran, North India, Central Asia, and Turkey. In Europe, they invaded Poland and attacked Vienna in Central Europe. The only thing that saved Europe was an assassination. Ogedei Khan was the son of Genghis Khan. He was elected Khan by the Council of Chiefs that ruled over the Mongols. He greatly expanded his father's empire. In 1241, he was poisoned by his mother-in-law. Mongol custom required all chiefs and potential Khans to come back for a vote as to who would be the next Khan. It took 5 years for the next Khan to be declared, and he only lasted 2 years. Mongol momentum had ended. The empire also split into 4 Khanates. But Ogedei had avoided poisoning. The lack of a 7-year recovery period for Europe continues Mongol conquest. There was no reason the Mongols could not take all of Europe. Their tactics were innovative. Their armies were almost all cavalry fighting against infantry, using horse riding skills, archery, and mobility Mongol males learned since childhood. The only place likely to be unconquered by Mongols are the British Isles. Mongols tried and failed to conquer Japan twice, defeated mostly by typhoons. Mongol invasions of Java also failed. Mongolia is landlocked. The Mongol Empire never had much success with a navy. England and Scotland are still separate, would still remain separate under this, though Wales and Ireland had just come under English control. What finally defeated the Mongols is that their empires became so large it became impossible to govern. The different Khans assimilated into the people they conquered. Kublai Khan became a Chinese empire. The others, Turkic, Persian, or Russian. These successor states lasted up to 1687, more than 300 years. There would be Mongol successor states in Europe, giving the Americas and native people almost a 200-year break. That break could be when natives forge iron weapons, making conquest by Mongol European successor states more difficult. The worst conquest actually might be by English and Scottish invaders, assuming they don't unite sooner or not unite at all. Invasions by Mongol successor states might be less destructive than European genocides in our own timeline. Mongol conquests were certainly very brutal. They were usually in the 30 to 40% range in deaths. But this compares to European conquest and genocides in the Americas that killed 90% or more. Once the Mongols won, they practiced religious and cultural tolerance to make their rule easier. A later conquest, more difficult, and with a lower death toll, and possibly without suppression of native religions and cultures, is easily better than the multiple genocides in our timeline, the last of them ending just in the year 2000. That certainly counts as native victory. This is the end of the 5th video. I look forward to your comments and questions and will answer them as often as I can. Racism, genocide denial, childish behavior, or personal attacks will get deleted. But I do recognize some questions will be asked in ignorance because much of the facts I point to are new to most people. They were never taught about this. They've been raised in denial since denying indigenous genocides is taught in almost all public schools. Next time we will discuss, what if a leader dedicated to religious conversion commands the first Spanish expedition to the Americas instead of Columbus? Please repost freely, like, share, comment. I will post again in about a week. This has been What If Natives Won video blog and channel.